Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Welcome, everyone. I must say I was surprised when Ashok asked me to say a few words, and there really are, there's just going to be a few words. Because essentially I consider Ashok a great influence on me, an elder as a writer, not simply because he's about 20 years older than me. Ashok, as I think most people in this room know, has been a great influence on the arts and culture environment in Western Canada. I could say Canada as a whole. He has supported and inspired many of us. I think sometimes, for me at least, it's amazing that someone can be as active in other people's work as Ashok in a positive way, and yet have the time to accomplish something as monumental, I believe, as this novel. A Little Distillery is, in fact, a big novel, and I know it's going to have a great impact on the scene as well. Please join me in welcoming Ashok Mathur.
Nothing is going to break the way arts happen in this province or in this country. People aren't going to stop simply because money's not there. So let's keep doing and producing the work as we need to, because that's what gives us life to our culture and life to us around. So let's keep doing that. I'm going to read a couple of short bits from here, if I can see the pages. I read the other day at the Railway Club, and so I read just a couple of sections from the first bit of the novel. I'm going to read, I think, a short bit from each of these sections, and then we can go back to meeting and greeting and having a few drinks. I want to say just briefly about this novel, though. I started it, oh God, it must have been about 7 years ago. And it started really by listening and talking to my mother, who has since passed, and her desire to tell story. So this is where it comes from. And so essentially it follows, not to give too much of a synopsis, but it follows a Parsi Zoroastrian community coming out of India and moving through a lot of different changes. So the first section I'm going to read from is from a part after the grandfather character has just been born, and you'll see as the novel progresses a certain amount of narrative shifting that goes on between stories, between chronologies. And so Jamshed was born in the town of Surat on the west coast of India, 9 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days earlier. A mid-40s Dastur looked fondly at his wife of 5 years. Although very much in love, they did not make love all that often, not for any particular reason, just that it didn't occur to them to do so, neither of them being especially needy in that area of human interaction. But at that moment, the Dastur looked at his wife, reached out to touch her cheek. She looked back at him with love, and although with some alarm, since it was early in the afternoon, in the middle of summer, and surely too hot to do anything but laze about in the shade until the late afternoon when it cooled ever so slightly, and one could return to the work at hand. Which was, of course, precisely the reason her husband was at home, waiting for the reduced heat of the evening when he could return to his duties. So it surprised even him when he reached out and stroked his wife's cheek. And as such things go, one thing led to another, and at the end of it they lay side by side, perspiring far more profusely than they might have been warranted under the circumstance. Jamshed's mother-to-be lay on her side, her feet propped up on a pillow to keep her feet cool. Who knows if that uppropping was enough to convince an overheated spermatozoa that it might as well continue its journey, since it was, after all, downhill, and without much effort an egg might not have been rudely awakened and little Jamshed never eventually born. And she thought of how this had been pleasant, but would have been more so if it had happened later in the day when the sun wasn't so hot. But they had been married for 5 years without so much of a thought of pregnancy, so there was no need to entertain such thoughts right now, was there? At least that's what Suna thought at that time, and continued to think for 2 months and then beyond that. even though by then it had become obvious that either she was pregnant or something was terribly wrong. And then, 9 months, 2 weeks, 3 days later, Jamshed was born. And another 9 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days later, after Jamshed's birth, there was much celebrating in Surat as the townsfolk bid goodbye to 1899 and welcomed in the turn of the century, the turn into the 20th century. And all of this was, of course, to make a profound difference to the Kargat family, and of course, to me. But that in itself is a story so strange that it will take some time to come around to it. So I shall just have to be patient. After Jamshed was born, he and Suna were immediately sequestered in a tiny room toward the back of the house, a room normally reserved for having tea in the middle of a summer day's heat. In one corner of the room, a duvet was lit, and it was in that room that the mother and child happily remained for 6 days, since it was the coolest room in the house, and finally gave Suna some privacy. On the 6th evening, of course, her mother arrived to perform the chutney, purifying both Suna and the room, and bringing with her a set of new clothes that her grandson would wear on his first trip to the Aguiari. After Suna's mother had left, Jamshed's father proudly strutted into the room, produced a fine piece of writing paper, a quill he had borrowed from his friend Rushman, a customs official and thus a very fine writer, and a pot of red ink. When Vimai arrives, pronounced Bermshah, he will find before him such a beautiful boy that he will write only the finest destiny for the child. Then, declaring himself a man after all, a man enough to produce a male heir, I have decided on his name, said Bermshah Kargat. Whose name? Asked Suna, looking fondly at her newborn. Whose name? Whose name? Why, his name, the little fellow here, my son. I have decided on his name. Suna looked up disinterestedly, smiled Mona Lisa-ly, and said, but he already has a name. Bermshah sputtered, but I have not named him. Suna smiled in response. Fine, then let us name him. We can decide on this together, can we not? But I have a name. Indeed you do, and it's a fine name for a leader such as you, but our son should have a name that distinguishes himself. That's not what I mean. I mean I have decided on a name for my boy. Is it Feroja? Feroja? No, certainly not. That's a girl's name, and my son, he's my son, and he deserves a man's name. Fine, fine. Then he shall have that. A strong man's name. Ah, Sir John Malcolm. Do you remember him? Governor of Bombay, a fine man and a strong supporter of us Parsis. We shall call him Malcolm. Malcolm? Malcolm? No. He has to have a good Parsi name, a name that will recall his family's history, a legacy. This boy will grow out to be an outstanding man, my dear, and he will follow in his father's footsteps. He will be a great Dastur, mark my words, and his name should be someone of the stature. Sounds a bit conceited, don't you think? Yes, he will be a fine young man, whatever he chooses, but let us not give your heir airs, because his time. Let us be careful in choosing a name. But we are not choosing. I have chosen. Is that not clear? Abundantly. But life is a compromise. So I will agree to compromise as well. You had a name picked out, did you say? I have a name picked out, yes. And I have a name picked out too. Oh, with all the names around, it's probably not the same name. That doesn't matter, he has a name. I am the father and I have named him. Oh, decrees and degrees. I'm tired of all that. What did we just say about compromise? Compromise. Let's do this. Let us do our son justice. You throw out your name and I shall discard mine. Discard a perfectly good name, one that my son was born into? Yes, that's a sacrifice that I, as only a mother can, will make. You will make. Yes, I discard my name for my son, and you throw out your name for my son. My son, indeed. And we shall choose an entirely new name for him, which is Jamshed. Jamshed? Yes, wonderful. See what a good compromise does about it? But what was the name you had originally chosen? It's bad luck to utter a name that was once chosen and is now no longer. But nothing. From this day forth, neither of us will utter our previously chosen names for little Jamshed ever again. Indeed, we must put those names out of mind entirely, for they can only come back to hurt him. Hurt him? Yes, you wouldn't want to do anything to harm a little hair on little Jamshed's head now, would you? No, of course not. Then it's settled. But Jamshed, wasn't Jamshed your father's name? Yes, happy coincidence. Yes. You see, compromises can bring good things to bear. I suppose so. Yes, indeed.